Hi everyone, my name is Christine Gillard. I'm an environmental educator at Munn Botanical Garden. Today I'm going to talk to you about food security and sustainability. And don't worry, I'm going to explain what that means. So first of all, I want to give you a few statistics I pulled there from Stats Canada. 2007 was the newest ones I could find. And that is that Canadians in our smallish population relatively compared to some other countries, we are about 0.5% of the total global population. Now, of that, we produce 1.5% of the food that is produced in all of the world. And we actually only consume 0.6% of that world food production. These are all about numbers. And of course, it depends on each year. So you can see there that we actually produce a significantly higher, over double the amount of food that we consume. So we must be exporting a significant amount of this food. StatsCan also says there that 70% of the food that we buy in our stores, in our Canadian stores, is produced domestically, meaning it's produced here in Canada. Now, whereabouts in Canada and where you're living may not be one and the same, so it's a big country, things might travel far. But 70% doesn't seem too bad, but in the grand scheme of things, it's maybe not as good as we might think. Between 1931 and 2006, the amount of farms that were in the country, the volume of farm land has increased slightly. Oh, it sounds good. We're using more land for producing food. There's a higher population, kind of makes sense. But the actual number of farms that have changed over that time has decreased from that 728,000 to 229,000. That's almost a 70% decrease in farms. So what exactly is happening there? Well, we are actually having farms become these huge multinational corporations that may or may not be owned by Canadians. And so our money is actually being sent off to these big corporations and possible other places. So although it's being produced here, it's not that the money is staying here in our country. I have a commercial, or I don't know if I could call it that, a 3-minute video that was produced by Hellmann's, as in the mayonnaise company. And I thought it was a really good representation to show you what has been happening to our food industry in Canada over a period of time. Now, in this video, you can't click links directly in this video. If you go back to our website, where our lab is listed on the Botanical Gardens website, you'll find a link there to this Hellmann's video. I think it was produced maybe back in 2010 or so. It is old. They mention a website at the end that is not active anymore. And I don't think they're the ones sharing the commercial. Somebody just had it copied up there on YouTube. So go ahead, pause my video now and take a look at that video so you can come back and think about that for a bit. Go ahead now. Okay, now that you've watched that video, you can kind of get that feeling of saying, yeah, we really are losing our farming culture and where our heritage has come from. And I mean, 700 pears are exported for every pear that we consume locally. I mean, that's crazy. Why? These numbers just don't make sense. And the only reason it does make sense, of course, is for money. And we're putting money first before many other things. Now, food security is a word that is often misunderstood. And over my years of teaching this lab and having discussions with people, this terminology has come up a few times. So here in Newfoundland, we have an organization that's now called Food First. A few years back, they were called Food Security Newfoundland and Labrador. And we're just the Newfoundland and Labrador chapter of a federal organization, so Food Secure Canada, who help to look at our access and availability to healthy, nutritious food. And that's for each people living where they are. I think there was confusion over what that terminology meant, and so Food First rebranded a few years back. I once had somebody say to me, so is somebody coming and robbing all of their food from them? Thinking that kind of security. So it does make it a little bit more easier to understand, I guess. But this organization here in Newfoundland is a great one to help us gather information and help us retain this knowledge about food and food culture here in our province. So if you also go back to our website, I have this PowerPoint on the website as a PowerPoint, and there are many links embedded throughout it. So if you don't want to just Google something yourself or can't find something, you can use the links that are in the PowerPoint slide itself to follow to the Food First website, for example. So on their website, they talk about that we have some challenges. And I mean, if you live here in Newfoundland, you probably know that there is challenges for us in food. So one of those big ones being that we only produce 10% of the fresh vegetables that we consume and have a 2 to 3 day supply of fresh vegetables available. So what happens when there's a big storm? You go to the grocery store and the shelves are empty. I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, the same kind of thing was happening. We're an island, things aren't coming in. So this is a huge challenge for us. In 1951, there were 3,626 farms in the province, but now in 2016, there's only 407. What happened to them? What happened to the farms? And this is something Food First is looking at. It's actually difficult to get local seafood, and 80% of what's produced locally is exported. So you go to the grocery store and you buy Highliner fish sticks. They're not produced from the cod that's fished right offshore here in the Atlantic Ocean. My husband came home with some Pacific cod. I think it was farmed cod too one night. I'm like, why are we buying Pacific cod? Like, why did that have to come and fly all the way across the country when we know that we could just go down to a wharf and possibly meet up with a fisherman here? It's not as easy as it seems, and of course, connecting with the people harvesting this food isn't always happening. We have the highest rate of food bank usage in Canada, 1 in 20 people. That means that you look around your lab, or I mean, yes, you're not in with your other classmates there, but in your lab, you're going to have approximately 20 or so people. There's probably somebody in each lab who has used a food bank. And that's really alarming. I mean, of all of Canada, we have the highest rate there. And I'll go into why these things are happening in my next slide. We have the highest rate of heart attacks, highest obesity rates, and highest amount of diabetes in all of Canada. So unfortunately, we also are a very unhealthy province, and this all relates back to our food. 84% of our communities have no grocery store. If you think about some of the outport communities, they often will have a convenience store that sells their chips and pop and cigarettes and other things, and they might have a little stand. It's like in town here, we have Marie's or Needs, these convenience stores, and they might have a small grocery counter, but that actual large supply of groceries we may be able to get easily at Dominion or Sobeys or Coleman's isn't always there for 84% of those communities. Can you imagine having to make that huge extra effort to get to the grocery store? That definitely is a big challenge. Okay, so why? And I feel like the answer to this is pretty obvious, but I'm going to go over them. So half of this province is an island, and trying to get stuff to an island, and the other half having many outport communities that are inaccessible by roads, must be accessed by boats with the weather issues. it's obviously very difficult to deliver food to these places. We're a very spread out population over a very large geographic area. The weather. I mean, the weather is the number one issue. If you're a gardener in Newfoundland, I often quote to people that we have some of the worst weather in all of Canada. We have the highest rainfall amount, we have the highest snowfall amount, we have the most wind, we have the most gloomy days, meaning the least amount of sunlight. It's just a difficult place to grow things. So it's a difficult place for transportation. It's a difficult place for us to even go outside and go to the store. It's much easier in other parts of Canada. And then, of course, the economics. The longer you have to transport food to get to our doors, there's going to be an increased cost. And on top of that, the longer food has to transport, it's going to have reduced nutrition as something is picked before it's ripe so that it'll be ripe when it hits your door, means it's not being picked at the most nutritious time for that fruit. And these foods are being bred to be able to be traveled well, so they don't bruise easily, they have slightly tougher skins, and they tend to also then inversely have less flavor and less nutrition. We have the lowest consumption of fresh vegetables in Canada. Now, we could say, is that our culture, that we just choose not to eat these things, or is it that they're expensive and they're hard to come by? The average age of farmers in the province is 55 and rising. Now, you look around again at all of your friends and say, who wants to be a farmer when they grow up? Well, some people love gardening. I love gardening too, but farming is hard work. It's hard labor with very little reward in the end. And even then, there's actually a lot of difficulties for somebody to start farming. Usually farms are passed down in generations. I mean, buying the land, the financial cost up front. And so you get these farming families where the parents are still farming and their children have moved on to jobs in the engineering field or in the medical field where they're expecting to get a higher salary than something like farming. And the largest complaint, of course, is that with our culture these days that we don't have enough time and money to grow, hunt, fish, forage, and preserve food like we once did. That was a very large part of the Newfoundland culture, and people survived producing everything they needed. My husband's grandmother grew up in an Outport Twillingate location, and they raised their own meat. They raised their sheep and goats, and they produced their own milk and eggs. And of course, they grew all of the vegetables and fruit, or they foraged for it, and then would wild hunt for what they wanted extra. They weren't dependent on this 70% of their food coming in from away. And that kind of shows us that there is this huge loss of traditions, that we talk about our grandparents' generation having this knowledge, whereas our parents' generation, it ends up being that they started to expand their distance and their travels and went away for school and took on new skills that were not the skills that required us just to survive independently. Okay, so Food First NL gives us these suggestions on how can we do something about this? How can we make an effort to eat locally? And I'm going to go through this list here. So they're saying to eat, first of all, what's in season. You don't go out and buy strawberries in December, because strawberries is a spring or early summer fruit. And they have this chart suggesting on buying those things. So if you want strawberries grown locally, there's fabulous strawberries grown locally. I mean, I pick wild strawberries off my front lawn, and they're the tastiest little gems. But of course, that's only for a few weeks in the early parts of the summer. You can find a local farm or a food retailer and go directly to the farm. And I feel if you are in the St. John's area, you're very familiar with kind of on that map there, I'll bring up my cursor, the St. John's Farmers Market is a great one. The Lester's Farm, of course, is another one, but there are many other places around, farms that are popping up now. And through the use of the internet and social media, we are starting to see more knowledge spread, but many of those places are out there. I actually grew up in Southern Ontario, and my favorite thing to do would be driving home from somewhere and stopping by the farm and picking up some sort of food. Corn was a great one. And we would eat it for dinner that night. And it never tastes better than something like that, unless, of course, you've grown it yourself. But there are starting to be a few more roadside markets, but there are lists out there. There are a few organizations that have produced these lists, or you can do a Google search. And there was actually a map produced a few years back. I don't think is active anymore, but it listed many of the farms that you could go to in these areas. Okay, obviously visiting the farmers market, and that's the great idea because all of the various farmers around come to the market and find you there. It's not just about hitting up the different ethnic restaurants, which I personally love as well, but actually getting to meet and talk to your local farmers and asking them about their food production, what they're doing. And you know, if you have something that is part of your diet that you're not finding in the stores, you can go to a farmer and say, yeah, I really would like okra. Okra I don't find often in the stores. How can I get that? And you know what? We can grow it here, but they have to know that there's a demand for it. And so having that actual communication with a farmer can make a big difference. One of the things that is difficult, of course, for farmers is that it's very risky. Weather dependency, knowledge if people are going to buy all of the stuff that they're producing. So there's a program that's called a CSA. A CSA can sometimes be called a community supported agriculture program or consumer shared agriculture. The idea is that you pay an upfront amount to a farmer and you are guaranteeing them that you are supporting them for the season. And so what they do is in return for a set number of weeks, they give you a bag of produce, usually early in the season. It's smaller amounts as the spring and the early summer comes on. You might be getting some leafy greens and some herbs. But by Thanksgiving in the fall, you're producing all of these root crops and you're getting a large amount. And usually it can be equal to or better than the cost of actually buying from a grocery store. And you know that these ideas are coming, these food are coming in, and they'll send recipes and ideas along with the food that you're getting. Of course, you aren't picking what you're getting, but it kind of opens you up to some different options and varieties maybe you haven't thought about buying. Like you can see in these pictures, maybe you get some purple carrots, or maybe you're going to get some yellow zucchini, something different that maybe you aren't as used to. They usually have a set pickup location, and each farm has their own, whether you go to the farm or if it's a farm from out of town, they might come into St. John's on certain days of the week, and that's all organized with them. When I first started doing this PowerPoint slide, there was only 1 or 2 farms participating in this type of program. And I had to search earlier before I was recording this presentation, and I found 4 or 5. So all you have to do is just do a quick search for a CSA in your local area and see if someone is offering that. And I've seen some posted already. I pulled these numbers off of one of their sites. I was trying not to be specific to one of them. But so a small share is food for, they're saying 1 or 2 people. It's really dependent on your diet and how much you're eating, of course, but over those 12 weeks, so you pay $375 up front, and that works out to about $30 a week on average. And you get this large amount of vegetables that, and maybe some fruits, depending on the location. And you can see that they'll go show you a list or pictures from previous years. A large share is maybe for a family of 4 or 2 people, a couple who really love their vegetables and are going to eat a lot of it. The idea of paying them up front, of course, is making sure that that farmer has all of that the labor and the fuel, any equipments that they need, if they're going to have some upfront large repairs that they have to do. All of this money is guaranteed to them. Of course, that means that if it's a really bad year in their garden, you might notice it as well. Now, they do their best to balance it out. If maybe it was a bad year for cucumbers, but it was really good year for turnips, you might get more turnips this particular year than from one to the next. Of course, you can garden yourself. Now, on Munn campus, there actually is a community garden there. You can apply for a space in a plot, and it's just something through, I think, the sustainability office that they offer. You register and attempt to get a space. I think there's been a huge demand for it, and over the years they have actually increased the space for this community garden. If you live on campus, or if you live near the university, or are there often enough that you can spend some time gardening. I just wanted to throw in this picture. The plate of fruits and vegetables there are all something that I grew in my own backyard, aside from the blueberries, which of course I've wild harvested. Actually, I do have a blueberry bush in my backyard. I get maybe 15 blueberries off of it every year, which is why it's for fun. It's not really for a great harvest. That's why you need to go out into the wild. So yeah, gardening is possible. You can get a huge variety of things, and they're so tasty. When you pick a carrot from your own garden and just rinse off that dirt and just gnaw on it, then it's so much tastier than buying something that was shipped in and has been sitting in the store shelves for a few weeks. Obviously berry picking there. You can see my hands are purple from picking many berries. It's a very well followed Newfoundland tradition. So if you're not living here in Newfoundland, or if you're not originally from Newfoundland, it's something that you really do need to do. The fun or funny part about this is, if you would like to go blueberry picking and you ask somebody where to go, you're not probably going to get a direct answer, because no one wants to share their good spots for blueberry picking. As a biology student, this is where you have the advantage of knowing that blueberry plants grow well in disturbed areas after there's been a forest fire. They like to grow in coastal locations. So find your spot, maybe on the East Coast Trail somewhere. Just get out, go for a hike, and you might find a few good spots. I won't tell you mine. Obviously, in our culture here, we still do have a great history of wild harvesting if you are a meat eater. Obviously, the cod fishing and moose hunting are two things with licenses you can be doing in season, and then getting enough either for sharing or for storing it, which brings me to the next one, which is preserving the harvest. Making jellies and jams, preserving maple syrup is something I like doing, and having these things throughout the year. Then you can be eating your frozen strawberries. I freeze my raspberries that grow in my backyard, and I throw them into my pancakes all year round, because I ate more than enough in season, and then I just freeze the rest. So if you have the space for a freezer, it really can help extend that season of being able to have those delicious foods locally. And then supporting those restaurants that source local food. And this is where you're going to say, but Christine, how do I know that they're buying local food? Well, did you ask? It doesn't hurt to ask. You can ask anyone. Ask Subway, ask McDonald's, ask Raymond's. I mean, you're going to get a wide range of restaurants, but that doesn't mean that they can't source things locally. And I understand maybe with certain licensing agreements, maybe those chains can't, but that's where maybe you go to a more independent fast food or sandwich shop, and then ask them about what they can get. So making those choices really can make a difference and help support our local economy. I love this one here, sprouting. If you have watched our previous discussion, mine and Todd's, about the grocery store Botany, I mentioned sprouting on your countertop. And I hope to be putting together a video for your propagation lab. I think that's lab number 7, on how to spread at home. But talk about local, this is right on your kitchen counter beside the sink. You can't get any more local than that. Eating sprouts can happen all year round. Your house is a perfect growing environment for it. All right, now, so here's another one of these links to a video. This is just a trailer to a video. It's a few minutes long. The video is called Nourish, Food Plus Community. And I really like a few of the comments that they say in this video about making a difference with how we're eating. So again, I'm just going to say to pause your video and click that link to watch that video. Okay. All right. Now that we're back, one of my favorite quotes from that, of course, is vote with your fork. We all eat. We all can make changes by how we eat. And we are telling the retailers, we are telling the restaurateurs what we want with our forks. So tell them what you really do want. This brings us to this whole idea of food justice. And this is the Food Secure Canada I mentioned earlier. That is the national organization that Food First falls under their umbrella of. So they have this really good quote I just wanted to read there. So food justice seeks to ensure that the benefits and risks of where, what, and how food is grown, produced, transported, distributed, accessed, and eaten are shared fairly. Food justice represents a transformation of the current food system, including but not limited to eliminating disparities and inequalities. Everyone should have access to healthy, nutritious food. Okay, now this brings me into the discussion of organic, and actually this was mentioned in that the Nourish trailer there. And I've had this discussion a few times with people, how I feel that people are sometimes feel like organic is supposed to be more nutritious. It's not. Organic has nothing to do with nutrition. It's more about the health of the environment where those plants were growing and the health of the people who are working there. So for something to be certified organic, they have to limit or prohibit the use of toxic and persistent pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, the routine use of drugs or antibiotics or synthetic hormones. There's no use of animal cloning. There's no GMOs. There's no sewage sludge, and there's no irradiation used. This is something to be certified organic. There are many farms out there who can't afford, and it's not in their budget to be certified organic, who still follow these principles and keeping it a healthy environment for their land, for their farm, for their staff, and knowing going forward that it is healthy. But if you do find something certified organic, you notice nothing of that says it's more nutritious. So they also forbid the use of artificial food colorings, artificial flavors, artificial sweeteners, preservatives, and many of the other processing aids and ingredients in processed foods. Which of course means your food might spoil more quickly. It may not look as presentable. And I think over time, we started to learn how adding some of these things, artificial sweeteners and food colorings, can be detrimental to our health. There's some links with certain food dyes and affecting behavior of children. So keeping these out of our food system is the idea of keeping the entirety of our environment healthy. So not just nutrition for us. Yeah. So one of the other things as part of our overall idea here is talking about fair trade. And I feel again that this is one of those things where people misunderstand the terminology. And I've had people mix up and say free trade, and when they mean fair trade. Free trade is an agreement between two countries or two parties where they won't tax each other to import or export their goods. Whereas fair trade is about having that justice for the people who are producing the food for us. And if you've watched Todd's coffee, tea, and cocoa presentation, and you find it heartbreaking hearing these stories about the slave labor and the child labor and what's going on, this is where fair trade comes in, to make sure that you're buying a product that is not exploiting these lower income countries. So again, you can pause this video and go back, and the link will take you to the Fair Trade Canada's website, and they have a video on what fair trade is. I think it's actually produced for a British market, but it's a good kind of example of what that really means. So go ahead and pause there again. Okay, now that you have watched that one, you can keep an eye out if you've never noticed before about what in our stores is labeled fair trade and what does that symbol mean. And it's something to think about with all of this labeling, with something being labeled organic or something being labeled fair trade, is that there are a lot of labels out there on our products. Labels telling us things that suggest something is good, and it can be very confusing. One of my biggest pet peeves has to be something saying it's biodegradable. So a biodegradable plastic breaks down into a million pieces of plastic in the environment, which is pollution. You want something that's compostable. If it's certified compostable, it means it's a natural material that will break down, get decomposed by decomposing organisms, and not pollute our environment. So terminology and what these symbols are and knowing what they are do give you a better understanding. This is about opening up our knowledge about what exactly is happening beyond just on our plate. If you find any of the discussions I've had today here with you interesting and you would like to know a little bit more, these are some of books either I have read or I have found topics or on my wish list to read. You can click the links again. I'll put the links in the description of this YouTube video below as well. And some really, really fun ones. The Animal Vegetable Miracle one, it really inspired me to read it. I suggest reading it. I think it starts in April. So it's around this time of the year you start reading it now, and it gets you inspired to do gardening at home and to grow local as much as possible. The edible plants of Newfoundland and Labrador, there's plenty of things that we can eat in our wild area if we want to harvest them. It's a book produced actually by a previous director here at the Botanical Garden, Peter Scott, and we do sell that one at the gift shop here, although it's available elsewhere as well. But yeah, these are some ideas. I'm always open for suggestions. If you have something you feel should be on this list, or something would be good reading, or a good thing to watch. Again, these are links to some videos, some of them free, some of them just telling you about them. You may need to purchase to watch some of these videos. That bottom one, to make a farm, I think at first it wasn't available for a period of time, but it is again now in 2021. So you can go on that TVO website to watch this movie about these young Canadians who want to have a farm and all the trials and tribulations of trying to get a farm started. And I'm pretty sure at least one of the families is in Southern Ontario, so a much, much easier growing environment than it would be here in Newfoundland. I've run into a few young people who wanted to start farms in Newfoundland, and it's just lots of legal paperwork and finding the funding, finding the land. It's shocking how much hoops you have to jump through just to start a farm here. And then, of course, some other ideas about food and climate change there from the David Suzuki Foundation. All right, I hope you enjoyed this, and it was a kind of enlightening a bit about our food and then the sustainability of our food and that overall idea of the security of it and making it accessible for all of us and keeping us all happy and healthy. Thanks very much for listening in. This is the end of the presentations for the Biology 2010 in our Botany lab. Thanks very much.